The crosshairs found him at 847 meters. Riley Cassidy's breath came shallow through the thin mountain air of Kunar province, each exhale a controlled whisper that wouldn't disturb the rifle's perfect stillness. Through the Leopold scope, the world compressed into a circle of magnified clarity. A Toyota Hilux, third in a convoy of 4, crawling along the dirt road like ants following a trail they'd walked 1,000 times before. The man in the passenger seat wore a Pacol hat and a tactical vest that didn't match the shepherd's disguise he was attempting. His beard was salt and pepper, groomed too carefully for someone who actually lived in these mountains. The radio crackled in her ear with familiar static. Then Colonel Brennan's voice came through, flat and final. Wade Brennan, 48 years old, 3 decades of making hard decisions had carved lines into his face that no amount of rest could smooth away. Ghost One, this is Overwatch. You are eyes only on this target. Observe and report. Do not engage under any circumstances. Acknowledge. Riley's finger rested alongside the trigger guard of her SR-25. Not on it. Never on it until the decision was made and the mathematics were complete. Below her position, 800 meters down the slope in a different valley entirely, Team 5 was moving through a dried riverbed toward the village of Dara Nor. 8 operators, good men. The best the Navy had produced. They couldn't see what she could see from her elevated position. 18 hostiles, maybe 20. They were positioned in a crescent formation along the ridgeline opposite her hide site, hidden in the rocks and shadows where infrared wouldn't pick them up during the daytime heat. Waiting with the patience of men who knew their craft. This wasn't a random Taliban ambush. This was orchestrated, planned. Someone had told them exactly where Team 5 would be and exactly when they'd arrive. Ghost One, acknowledge order immediately. Riley keyed her mic once. The click meant she'd heard the transmission. It didn't mean she'd obey. There was a difference her instructors at sniper school had never quite managed to explain away. Her spotter had rotated out 3 days ago for a family emergency back in Virginia. His daughter, some kind of medical crisis. So Riley was alone up here on this mountain, which was how she preferred it anyway. No one to question her judgment, no one to report back when she made the kind of decisions that ended careers. Just her and the mathematics of death spread out below. Wind speed at 4 knots from the northwest. Temperature dropping as the sun fell behind the peaks, throwing long shadows across the valley floor. Humidity at 38%. The bullet would drift 7 inches right and drop 19 inches over 847 meters of mountain air. She'd already calculated the correction. Her body already knew the adjustment like breathing. Team 5 reached the village entrance right on schedule. The hostiles tensed. Riley could see it in their posture through the scope even at this distance. Fingers tightening on weapons. The lead man raising his hand in a signal she recognized from 100 intelligence briefs and after-action reports. 3 fingers. 2, 1. Riley exhaled half her breath and held the rest. The SR-25 kicked against her shoulder like a heartbeat made solid. The sound rolled across the valley 3 seconds after the bullet arrived at its destination. By then, the hostile holding the RPG launcher had already fallen backward off the ridge, the rocket launcher tumbling from dead hands. The warhead detonated against the rocks where he'd been crouching, the blast tearing through the ambush line like the fist of an angry god. 4 more went down in the explosion, shrapnel and fire and the screaming of men who'd planned an ambush and walked into something worse. The others scattered like water finding cracks. Riley was already acquiring her next target before the echoes of the first shot faded. A man breaking left toward a machine gun position dug into the hillside. She led him by 2 body widths, accounting for his speed and the angle. Squeezed the trigger with the kind of pressure that came from 10,000 hours of practice. The 7.62 NATO round caught him in the spine, and he collapsed mid-stride like someone had cut his strings with scissors. Third target, a fighter trying to drag a wounded comrade behind cover. Riley hesitated for half a heartbeat. The mathematics said, take the shot, 2 fighters instead of 1. But the man dragging his friend wasn't armed. He was just trying to save someone who mattered to him. Her father's voice, a memory from a lifetime ago when she was 14, and learning what it meant to carry a rifle. The mission isn't about killing Riley. It's about bringing everyone home. Remember that, when the math says one thing and your gut says another. She shifted her aim. the armed fighter behind them raising an AK rifle to fire at Team 5's exposed position, center mass. The rifle spoke again with authority. The radio erupted with voices overlapping in organized chaos. Brennan shouting coordinates for fire support. Team 5 returning fire at targets they couldn't clearly identify. Someone screaming for a medic. The symphony of combat reduced to electronic noise in her ear. Riley tuned it out. She was in the rhythm now. The place where thought disappeared and instinct took over like a river finding its course. Target acquisition. Wind compensation. Trigger press. The rifle's recoil against her shoulder became a metronome marking time in violence. 6 shots total. 6 targets down across 800 meters of mountain terrain. The surviving hostiles were retreating now, dragging their dead with them, according to their customs, disappearing into the mountain crevices like water down a drain. Team 5 held position in the village, weapons trained on the ridgeline where the attack had originated. They'd never know how close they'd come to being slaughtered in that dried riverbed. Never understand that the only thing standing between them and body bags was one sniper who disobeyed direct orders. Riley's radio went silent. Not the ambient hiss of an open channel carrying background static. Actually silent. Dead air. Someone had cut her communications remotely, standard procedure when an operator disobeyed direct orders in the field and needed to be isolated until a decision could be made about what to do with them. She was alone now in a way that went beyond physical isolation. The wind picked up as the sun touched the western peaks, temperature dropping fast in that way mountains had of stealing heat. For just a moment, Riley was 14 again, lying in the snow on a Montana mountainside with her father beside her. His face was always in shadow in these memories, turned away from her or silhouetted against the sky, but his voice was clear as the mountain air. One shot ends it, Riley. You miss, you die. You hesitate, you die. But you shoot without purpose, without understanding the cost. Then you're just a killer with a gun. The mission is bringing everyone home when you can. Remember that when the order doesn't make sense, and you have to choose. She'd asked him once what you did when the order and the mission weren't the same thing. When following commands meant good people died. He'd been quiet for a long time, watching distant peaks. Then, you make a choice, and you live with it, or you don't, but you never blame someone else for the choice you made. Riley pulled back from the scope and began breaking down her hide sight with practiced efficiency. The ghillie netting came down first, then the camouflage tarp that had kept her invisible from any Taliban scanning the ridgeline. She packed the rifle into its case with movements automatic after 10,000 repetitions. The mountain was turning purple in the failing light. Temperature would drop 20 degrees in the next hour. She wasn't going anywhere until extraction arrived. If extraction arrived. 6 hours passed in silence before she heard the helicopter. The Pavehawk came in low over the ridge, rotors churning the thin air into a whirlwind of dust and loose stones. It didn't land, just hovered 3 feet off the ground while 2 crew chiefs in flight suits scanned the perimeter with weapons ready, fingers on triggers. Riley grabbed her pack and ran through the rotor wash, throwing her gear through the open door before pulling herself aboard with arms that had been holding position for too many hours. The crew chief's hand clamped on her shoulder, guiding her to a seat with rough efficiency. She strapped in. The helicopter banked hard and dropped into the valley, racing south toward Bagram Airfield at 140 knots. No one spoke over the engine noise. The crew chief wouldn't make eye contact. The pilot's shoulders were rigid with the kind of tension that came from transporting someone who might be under arrest. Colonel Wade Brennan sat across from her in the troop compartment. He was 48 years old, with grey at his temples, and the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of hard decisions in hard places. His eyes were the color of winter ice. He looked at Riley the way you'd look at a stranger who'd just walked into your house uninvited and sat down at your table. She started to speak, words tumbling together in her head about tactical necessity and saving lives. "Sir, I can explain what happened back there and why I made the call to engage when the rules of engagement specifically stated observe only and how the tactical situation evolved to require immediate action to prevent catastrophic loss of American lives in what became a clear and present danger to friendly forces operating in a hostile. Don't. One word, flat, final. The tone that ended conversations before they could begin. Riley shut her mouth, looked out the window at the mountains sliding past below like the bones of a dead world. Brennan didn't say another word for the entire 40-minute flight back to base. Neither did anyone else. The silence was louder than the rotors. Bagram Airfield materialized out of the twilight like a city of light in an ocean of darkness. Runways lined with floods that turned night into day. Hangars and operations buildings clustered together like organisms seeking warmth. The helicopter touched down on the pad nearest the Joint Special Operations Command compound. Brennan was out before the wheels fully settled, striding across the tarmac without looking back. 2 military police officers in full kit were waiting beside a Humvee. Their faces were professionally blank. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." They drove her to a CHU on the edge of the base. Containerized housing unit, 8 by 20 feet of prefabricated metal. A cot, a desk, a metal chair bolted to the floor, no window. They left her there with a bottle of water and an MRE she didn't touch. The overhead light never turned off. 48 hours. That's how long they kept her in isolation. No charges filed, no explanation offered, no visitors allowed, just Riley and her thoughts and the overhead light that burned into her retinas when she tried to sleep. She did push-ups until her arms shook and wouldn't support her weight. Ran in place until her legs cramped. Tried to sleep but couldn't manage more than 20-minute intervals before adrenaline and uncertainty jerked her back to consciousness. Her mind kept replaying the shot, the RPG fighter going down, the explosion saving 8 lives. Team 5 walking into that village alive instead of being carried out in body bags. She'd made the right call, hadn't she? On the morning of the 3rd day, the door opened. Master Chief Owen Reeves stood in the frame, backlit by the corridor lights beyond. He was 42 years old, but looked older, with scars that mapped a career of bad decisions survived through skill and luck in roughly equal measure. He'd been her instructor at sniper school 3 years ago, the only person there who hadn't treated her like a diversity checkbox or a liability waiting to happen. He stepped inside and closed the door, dropped a manila folder on the desk with a sound like a gavel. "Read this. You've got 10 minutes before I have to take it back." Riley opened the folder. The first page was a briefing sheet stamped with classification levels that made her security clearance look like a hall pass. Code word access required. Second page was a satellite photograph showing the convoy she'd observed through her scope. Third page was a dossier that made her blood run cold. Target designation, Mullah Rahman. Real name, Marcus Anthony Hale. Age, 55. Former Delta Force operator, separated from service 2008. Worked private security contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan until 2015. Current status, international arms dealer specializing in high-value weapon systems. Known associates, Haqqani Network, Pakistani ISI, various militant groups across Central Asia. Last confirmed location, Torkham border region. The photograph showed a man with salt and pepper beard and eyes that didn't match the smile on his face. Riley recognized him instantly. Third vehicle, passenger seat, the man she'd had in her crosshairs but hadn't engaged because orders were observe only. Next page outlined the operation that had taken 6 months to set up. Electronic intercepts, human intelligence from sources inside the Haqqani network who'd risked their lives to provide information. The convoy wasn't smuggling opium or weapons. They were on their way to deliver a shipment of FIM-92 Stinger missiles. American-made, stolen from a depot in Kandahar 3 years ago during the chaos of a base transition. The plan had been to follow the convoy to the cache location, then call in a precision strike that would eliminate Hale, his buyers, and the missiles in one surgical operation. Riley's shot had alerted Hale to surveillance. He'd vanished like smoke. The cache was empty when Team 5 raided it 6 hours later. 6 months of painstaking intelligence work erased by one bullet fired to save 8 lives. She looked up at Reeves. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because someone higher up the chain wants you to understand what you cost us. What happens when operators go cowboy and ignore the bigger picture." "Who?" "Keep reading." The last page was a psychological profile. Marcus Hale's complete background. Orphaned at 8 in a car accident that killed both parents. Foster care until 18. Joined the army at 19. Made Delta selection at 26. exemplary service record through multiple deployments, combat decorations including Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor, expert marksman, tactical innovator credited with developing new techniques for urban operations, separated from service with an honorable discharge and full pension. The profile noted concerning patterns, antisocial tendencies masked by professional competence, high intelligence paired with lack of emotional attachment to team members, pattern of risk-taking behavior that suggested either extraordinary courage or fundamental disregard for human life, including his own. The analyst who'd written the evaluation couldn't decide which. There was a note at the bottom in different handwriting. More recent. Subject trained under elite Special Forces instructors at Fort Bragg during advanced coursework 1990s. Recommend cross-reference with historical SEF instructor roosters for tactical pattern analysis. Riley's blood turned to ice in her veins. Her father had been Special Forces, elite instructor cadre at Fort Bragg. She didn't know much about his specific assignments because he'd never talked about his work in any detail. But she knew he'd trained special operations soldiers for 2 decades before his death, knew he'd been considered one of the best tactical minds in the special operations community, knew he'd died in 2003 during a training exercise accident when Riley was 15 years old. She turned the page even though she already knew what she'd find. The photograph was old, faded color from before everything went digital. 2 men in military uniforms standing in front of a Black Hawk helicopter. Both young, both smiling, the taller one had his arm around the shorter one's shoulders in that way soldiers did when they'd been through hell together. Brothers in arms. The caption identified them clearly. Left, Captain Jacob Thomas Cassidy, Special Forces instructor. Right, Sergeant Marcus Anthony Hale, 1st SFOD Delta. Her father and Hale, together. Smiling like the world made sense and friendship was real and betrayal was something that happened to other people. Riley's hands started shaking before her conscious mind understood what she was seeing. She set the folder down carefully like it might explode if she moved too fast. This is why you're showing me classified intelligence. Because Hale knew my father 30 years ago when they were both young and the world was different. Reeves leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. You need to understand what you're dealing with. Hale isn't just some arms dealer who got lucky. He's a ghost operator who learned from one of the best tactical minds in special operations history. Your father taught him everything he knows about tactics and fieldcraft and how to think 3 moves ahead. My father died in 2003, training accident at Fort Bragg. I was 15. Did he? The question hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Riley stood up fast enough that her chair scraped concrete. What are you saying? I'm saying you should read the next file, the one that isn't in that folder, because it's not officially part of any investigation. There was no next file visible. Reeves pulled a second folder from inside his jacket. This one wasn't official. No classification markings, just a torn piece of tape holding it shut like someone had sealed it in a hurry. He set it on the desk and stepped back. Riley opened it with hands that didn't want to cooperate. The first page was an autopsy report. Jacob Thomas Cassidy, deceased March 15, 2003. Location, Fort Bragg, Range 7, North Carolina. Cause of death, catastrophic cranial trauma consistent with high-velocity projectile impact. The medical examiner had ruled it accidental discharge during live fire training exercise. Case closed within 48 hours. But someone had made notes in the margins in blue ink. Recent notes based on the color and handwriting. Angle of entry inconsistent with accidental discharge from ground-level position. Trajectory analysis suggests elevated firing position 400+ meters minimum. No trainee positions at that range during exercise timeline. Recommend criminal investigation immediate. The recommendation had been overruled. By whom, the document didn't specify. Just a stamp, closed, no further action required. Next page was a ballistics report that made Riley's vision tunnel. The bullet recovered from Jacob Cassidy's skull was 7.62 NATO, match-grade ammunition, not the standard issue training rounds used in qualification courses. Someone had brought their own rifle to that range, their own carefully selected ammunition. Someone had made that shot deliberately with precision that spoke of expertise and planning. Someone had murdered her father and made it look like an accident. Riley's chest constricted until breathing felt impossible. She sat down hard in the metal chair. Who knows about this? People who matter, Reeves said quietly. People who've been waiting 15 years to prove what really happened on that range. Prove what? That Marcus Hale killed Jacob Cassidy. The words hit like physical blows to her solar plexus. Riley's vision grayed at the edges. She couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. The math didn't make sense. Hale was Delta, her father's student. Why would he kill his instructor? What possible reason could justify that kind of betrayal? Reeves must have seen the questions on her face because he continued without being asked. They had a falling out near the end of Hale's Delta career. Details are classified above my clearance level. But the rumor mill says Jacob discovered something Hale was doing or planning, something that crossed lines even in special operations. Jacob tried to stop him, and Hale made absolutely certain he couldn't. You have proof of this? Not the kind that would hold up in any court, but we have this, he tapped the folder. And we have you. Me? You just blew 6 months of surveillance trying to save 8 operators who walked into an ambush. That's exactly the kind of decision your father would have made. Exactly the kind of thinking Hale will understand because he studied under the man who would make that choice. He's been watching you, Riley, ever since you made it through sniper school with the highest scores in your class. Ever since you deployed to Afghanistan. He knows exactly who you are. And I think he's been waiting to see if you're anything like Jacob. Riley's mind was racing faster than she could process. Questions piling up like debris in a flood. What does JSOC want from me? They want Hale. He's got another deal in the works according to Signal's intelligence. Bigger than the Stinger missiles. Intel suggests he's acquired something that could kill thousands of people if deployed in an urban area. We don't know what exactly. We don't know where he's keeping it. But we know he's planning to sell it within the next 72 hours to the highest bidder. And you want me to find him? No, we want you to hunt him, alone, off the books. No official presence, no support structure, no extraction if you're compromised. You find him, you put him down with extreme prejudice, you come home. That's the mission in its entirety. Riley looked at the photograph of her father and Hale again. Young soldiers who didn't know yet how their story would end. Friends before something broke the friendship and turned it into murder disguised as accident. Why me specifically? Reeves was quiet for a long moment, then he pulled one more photograph from his jacket. This one was recent. High-resolution satellite imagery, a compound in the mountains near the Pakistani border. And standing in the courtyard, looking directly up at the camera like he knew exactly where it was Marcus Hale. He was holding something. A sign, handwritten in English with letters large enough to read from orbit. Hello, Riley Cassidy. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. He knows I'm coming. He's counting on it, Reeves said flatly. The question is whether you're going to give him what he wants. The door opened before Riley could answer. Colonel Brennan stepped inside. He looked at Riley the way you'd look at a weapon you weren't entirely sure would fire straight when you needed it most. Dangerous, unpredictable, necessary. Master Chief, give us the room. Reeves left without a word or backward glance. The door closed with finality. Brennan sat down on the edge of the desk, arms crossed over his chest. You violated direct orders in the field, engaged without authorization, compromised a long-term intelligence operation that cost blood and money to set up. Under normal circumstances and standard operating procedures, you'd be facing court-martial proceedings and dishonorable discharge. Riley said nothing. There was nothing to say that would change the facts. But these aren't normal circumstances. Hale is a clear and present national security threat, and he's made this personal by acknowledging you specifically by name on satellite surveillance. That makes you a tactical asset, whether either of us likes it or not. Or bait for a trap. Both, probably. Brennan's expression didn't change. I'm giving you a choice. Take the court-martial, face the consequences of your actions, accept whatever judgment the system renders. Go home with your record destroyed, but your conscience clear. Or take this mission, find Hale, stop whatever he's planning, bring him in alive for interrogation if possible, or put him in the ground if necessary. Your decision determines what happens next. And if I fail, then a lot of people die, and your failure will be classified so deep that nobody will ever know your name or what you tried to do. Riley thought about her father, about the bullet in his skull from a rifle fired by someone he trusted and trained. About 15 years of lies and a murder covered up as training accident. About Hale holding that sign with her name on it, smiling at the satellite camera, daring her to come find him and finish what started 30 years ago. One shot ends it. What's the timeline? 72 hours maximum. After that, whatever Hale is planning goes operational and we lose our window of opportunity to prevent it. Brennan stood up. You'll insert via halo drop into Torkham region, Pakistani side of the border, last known location of Hale's operational cell. You're completely black. No official American presence, no backup, no extraction unless you specifically request it and can reach a designated point. You find the target. You complete the mission. Questions? Just one. What happens if the mission and the order aren't the same thing? If the right choice means disobeying commands? Brennan looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Like he'd asked himself that same question 1,000 times in 30 years of service. Then you make a choice, and you live with the consequences. Or you don't, but you never pretend someone else made that choice for you. Her father's words, spoken by a man who'd never met him. I'm in. 24 hours later, Riley was in the air over Pakistan at 25,000 feet. The C-130 Hercules flew without lights, well above the altitude where civilian radar could track its passage. Inside the cargo bay, Riley sat in full tactical gear. Black outfit, plate carrier with ceramic inserts, SR-25 rifle case strapped to her leg with dummy cord, oxygen mask feeding her pressurized air so she could breathe in the thin atmosphere. The loadmaster held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to the drop zone. She stood on legs that had been sitting too long. Checked her gear one final time with methodical precision. The static line that would deploy her chute automatically. The altimeter on her wrist showing altitude in glowing numbers. The reserve chute packed tight against her back in case the main failed. Everything in order. Everything ready. The mathematics of survival reduced to equipment checks and procedural discipline that left no room for error. The rear ramp opened with hydraulic whine. The night sky beyond was absolutely black. No moon visible, no stars. Just darkness and the howl of wind at 200 knots screaming past the aircraft. The loadmaster pointed at the edge. Riley walked to the precipice and looked down. Somewhere below was Pakistan. Somewhere below was Marcus Hale waiting for her with lessons he thought needed teaching. She stepped into nothing. The free fall lasted 90 seconds that felt like falling through eternity. Silent except for the rush of wind. The world disappeared into absolute darkness. There was only the sensation of gravity pulling her toward Earth at terminal velocity, and the altimeter numbers counting down, and the absolute trust that the chute would deploy when physics and engineering said it should. At 4,000 feet, the static line pulled tight. The main chute deployed with a sharp tug that jerked her from falling to floating. She grabbed the steering toggles and oriented herself using the terrain features barely visible below. Mountains showing as darker shapes against dark ground. She aimed for a valley between 2 ridgelines that satellite imagery had identified as accessible terrain. The landing was harder than training. She hit sloped ground, rolled, came up with her rifle ready and scanning for threats. Nothing. No sounds except wind moving through rocks. No lights except stars finally visible now that her eyes had adjusted. She was alone in the mountains of Pakistan with 72 hours to find a ghost who'd killed her father and wanted to teach her lessons she didn't want to learn. It took 12 hours of hard movement to reach the observation point. The terrain was brutal in ways that training never quite captured. Loose shale that shifted under boots. Vertical cliff faces that had to be climbed with bare hands while wearing 40 pounds of gear. Riley moved slowly and carefully, stopping every 30 minutes to scan for patrols or surveillance. Pakistani military operated in this region. Taliban moved through these valleys like they owned them. One wrong step and she'd be captured or killed, and the mission would end before it started. The sun rose behind her as she crested the final ridge. Below, 2 kilometers distant across broken ground, was the compound where Hale had been photographed. It looked abandoned from this distance. No vehicles visible, no movement, no signs of human presence. But Riley had learned a long time ago that empty didn't mean safe. She found a hide site in a cluster of rocks that gave her clear sight lines to the compound, while providing cover and concealment. Set up the ghillie netting to break up her outline against the sky. Unpacked the rifle with reverent care, settled in to wait and watch the way snipers had waited and watched for centuries. 36 hours of observation in harsh conditions. That's how long it took before anything happened worth noting. Riley stayed motionless for hours at a time, drinking water through a tube in her pack, eating energy bars that tasted like cardboard mixed with disappointment, watching the compound through her scope for any sign of life or activity. The temperature swung 40 degrees between day and night. Her body ached from holding position, her eyes burned from constant focus through magnified optics. On the second morning after insertion, vehicles arrived at the compound. 4 Toyota Hilux trucks moving in tactical formation. Armed men in the truck beds wearing a mix of military and civilian clothing. They moved with discipline that spoke of training and experience, not Taliban who'd learned tactics through trial and error. These were professionals, Pakistani ISI conducting operations maybe, or Hale's private contractors earning their substantial pay. They unloaded equipment from the trucks, set up a perimeter with overlapping fields of fire. One man directed the operation from the center of the compound with the kind of authority that came from rank or respect or both. Through the scope, Riley saw his face clearly for the first time in person. Marcus Hale. He looked older than the decades-old photograph. Harder, lines carved into his face that came from years of living in places where life was cheap and violence was currency. But he moved with the same casual confidence she'd seen in the picture. Like he owned whatever ground he stood on. Like nothing in this world could touch him because he'd already survived worse. He turned, looked directly at Riley's hide site 1,100 meters away. She was concealed behind rocks and netting and distance, invisible to naked eye observation. But Hale smiled anyway, raised his hand, waved like greeting an old friend. Then he pulled out binoculars and stared straight at her position. Riley's heart hammered against her ribs. Impossible. There was no way he could see her. No way he could know she was there in that specific location. But the smile on his face said otherwise. He lowered the binoculars, spoke to the ISI officer beside him. The officer looked confused. Hale pointed toward the ridgeline where Riley hid. The officer called to his men. They started moving toward her position with weapons ready. She had maybe 10 minutes before they reached her hide site. Going loud meant revealing herself and engaging multiple hostiles. Running meant abandoning observation and losing Hale. Staying meant capture and interrogation and failure. None of the options were good. Then Hale got into one of the vehicles and drove away from the compound. Just left. While Riley watched him go through the scope and the ISI team climbed toward her position to find nothing but rocks and wind. She made a choice. Packed the rifle in under 30 seconds, collapsed the hide site, moved laterally along the ridge away from the approaching soldiers at speed that sacrificed stealth for distance. They were searching the area she'd been occupying, calling to each other in Urdu about finding evidence of American presence. But she was already 300 meters away and moving fast across terrain they'd have to navigate carefully. By the time they reached her abandoned position, she was gone like smoke. That night, Riley tracked the compound from a different location entirely. Watched through night vision as the ISI team loaded their equipment and drove away in the vehicles that had brought them. The compound sat empty again, under stars that didn't care about human concerns. She waited until 0300 hours, then moved in to search what Hale had left behind. The buildings were bare inside, concrete floors covered in dust, empty rooms that echoed. But in the basement of the main structure, she found something that made her blood freeze. A table with papers scattered across it. Most in Pashto or Urdu that she couldn't read without translation. But one document was in English, a manifest for shipping container transport. Karachi port to Kabul. Contents officially listed as agricultural equipment for development project. But someone had written notes in the margins, notes in English, notes that made Riley's hands shake as she read them. Suitcase nuke, enriched uranium core. Yield estimated 2 kilotons tactical. Below that, coordinates she recognized instantly. Kabul, U.S. Embassy compound. Riley photographed everything with her phone. Sent the encrypted images via satellite burst transmission directly to JSOC Operations Center. Then she searched the rest of the compound for anything else. found nothing but empty buildings and evidence that people had been here recently. She was about to leave when she saw the vehicle, a single Hilux parked behind the compound where she almost missed it. Engine still warm to the touch. Someone had been here within the past hour. She approached carefully with weapon ready. Checked the cab. Empty. Checked the truck bed. A tarp covered something. She pulled it back. A body lay in the truck bed. The ISI officer from earlier. Single gunshot wound to the head. Execution style at close range. Riley checked his pockets by feel in the darkness. Found his radio, his wallet, his identification, and a note on expensive cream-colored paper. The handwriting was precise, careful. The kind of penmanship that came from another era entirely. You shoot to save lives. I shoot to teach lessons. Ask yourself who taught you to shoot. Below the note was a photograph. Riley's hands started shaking before her conscious mind understood what she was seeing. Two men in military uniforms, young, standing in front of a helicopter. The taller one had his arm around the shorter one's shoulders. Brothers in arms before something broke the bond. Her father, Jacob Cassidy, and Marcus Hale. She turned the photo over. Someone had written on the back in that same careful handwriting, Fort Bragg, 1995. Last day I believed what he taught was truth. Last day before I understood what he really was underneath the uniform. Riley's radio crackled. Brennan's voice. Ghost 1, we've analyzed the intelligence you transmitted. It's confirmed. Hale has acquired a suitcase nuclear device. Unknown origin. Estimated yield 2 kilotons if detonated in urban environment. If that weapon detonates in Kabul Embassy District, the death toll will exceed 50,000 casualties. Riley keyed her mic with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. What's the mission now? New intelligence suggests Hale is relocating the device. Flying out of Jalalabad Airport tomorrow morning at 600 local time. This is your intercept window. You take the shot at the airport, or he disappears and we lose our chance. Understood. Ghost 1, be advised. Additional information has come to light regarding your father's death in 2003. The investigation was officially ruled training accident, but new evidence suggests the incident was homicide. The investigation was buried for reasons unclear. We now have reason to believe the shooter was Marcus Hale. This is now a sanctioned termination with extreme prejudice authorized. You are cleared to engage on site. Do you copy? Riley looked at the photograph in her hand. Her father's smile, Hale's arm around his shoulders. Brothers before murder. I copy. One more thing. Intelligence indicates Hale knows you're hunting him. Has known since before you inserted into theater. This could be an elaborate trap designed to draw you into a kill zone. Then I'm already dead and just don't know it yet. Your call, Ghost 1. Mission is yours to accept or decline. Riley stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she put it in her pocket next to her heart, grabbed her rifle, started walking toward Jalalabad. One shot ends it. Her father's voice in her memory as clear as the day he'd spoken those words. True as mathematics, final as gravity. You make a choice, and you live with it. Or you don't. She'd made her choice. Now she just had to survive it long enough to pull the trigger. Jalalabad Airport appeared through the pre-dawn darkness like a strip of concrete torn from the desert floor. Riley had been in position for 3 hours, lying flat on a rooftop 940 meters from the main runway. The building beneath her was abandoned, some kind of warehouse that had burned years ago in fighting nobody remembered and never been rebuilt. The concrete was still stained black with soot and chemical residue. Good cover, good concealment. Perfect sightlines to the civilian terminal where private aircraft came and went without the scrutiny of military oversight. The SR-25 rested on its bipod, scope zeroed at 900 meters, safety off and chamber loaded. She'd checked the weapon 4 times in the past hour, checked it again now with hands that knew this rifle better than they knew most people. Chamber loaded with match grade 7.62 NATO. Magazine seated with 20 rounds. Optics clear with no dust on the lens and no condensation in the tube. The ritual of verification that separated professionals who went home from corpses who'd trusted equipment without confirmation. Her breathing was controlled through conscious discipline. 4 seconds in through the nose. Hold for 2 heartbeats. 6 seconds out through barely parted lips. Repeat. Heartbeat steady at 58 beats per minute. slowed through practice and 10,000 hours of holding position while the world moved around her. Everything about her body said she was calm, relaxed, ready for the shot she'd trained her entire life to make. Everything except her mind. The photograph sat in her chest pocket, tucked against her heart like a talisman or curse, depending on how you looked at it. She could feel it against her ribs through the plate carrier. Her father and Hale, brothers in arms, young soldiers who'd survived deployments and come home to train the next generation of warriors. Before whatever truth Hale claimed to have discovered, before murder disguised as training accident, before 15 years of lies stacked on top of each other like sandbags holding back a flood of questions she couldn't answer. The math didn't add up in any equation that made sense. 30 years of friendship and professional respect erased by a single bullet. Men didn't just kill their mentors without reason, their brothers without cause. Not without something breaking inside them first, some fundamental shift in reality that turned loyalty into betrayal and made murder seem like the only solution to an impossible problem. There had to be more to the story, had to be. But that didn't matter now in this moment. The mission was simple, pure, mathematical. Hale would arrive at 0600 local time, according to intelligence intercepts. Board a private aircraft fueled and waiting on the civilian runway. Disappear into Pakistani airspace with a suitcase nuke that could kill 50,000 people in Kabul if detonated in the embassy district. Riley's job was to make sure he never reached that plane. One shot, sent a mass through the windshield of whatever vehicle delivered him. The kind of kill she'd trained for since she was 14 years old, lying in Montana's snow, with her father's rifle and his voice in her ear, teaching her mathematics and ethics in equal measure. 0 for 45. The sky lightened from absolute black to deep blue, like ink spreading through water. Stars fading like candles blown out one by one by an invisible hand. Temperature rising from 40 degrees to 45 as the sun approached the eastern horizon. Riley's muscles ached from holding position for 3 hours without movement. Shoulders cramping, lower back screaming protests, but she'd done longer. 5 days in the Hindu Kush mountains, waiting for a shot that never came because the target changed routes at the last second. Patience was the sniper's first and most important weapon, the one you couldn't buy or train into someone who didn't have it naturally. 0600 came and went. No Hale, no private aircraft landing or taking off, just the regular morning traffic of a provincial Afghan airport. A cargo plane landing with supplies from Islamabad, its engines screaming as reverse thrust slowed tons of metal and food and ammunition. 2 Pakistani military helicopters taking off on patrol, rotors chopping the air into thunder that echoed off the mountains. A commercial flight arriving from Dubai with businessmen and refugees, and people whose lives didn't depend on a man in a tactical vest stepping off a small plane. The airport going about its business like this was any other day. Like the world wasn't balanced on the edge of nuclear fire and death. Riley's radio crackled with Brennan's voice coming through the encrypted channel, tight with frustration and something else, concern maybe, or the first edge of doubt about whether his operator was following orders or improvising another disaster. Ghost 1 intel was bad. Target is not at location. Repeat, target is not at location. Recommend immediate abort and extract to Safehouse Alpha. We'll regroup and analyze what went wrong with the intelligence chain. Riley didn't move. Didn't key her mic, just lay there on the scorched concrete, watching the airport through her scope while her instincts screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. The intel hadn't been bad in the sense of inaccurate. It had been too good, too specific, the timing precise to the minute. The location detailed down to the runway number and the aircraft tail registration. The flight plan filed with Pakistani authorities exactly 24 hours in advance with passenger manifest and destination. Someone had fed JSOC exactly what they needed to hear to get Riley into position. On this rooftop, at this time, with a rifle and a clear sight line to the civilian terminal. It was too perfect, too neat, which meant it was a trap of some kind. The only questions were what kind of trap and who would spring it, and how many people would die when it closed. Negative, Overwatch. I'm staying in position. A pause on the radio. She could almost hear Brennan's jaw clenching across the miles of distance. The sound of a commander realizing his operator was going off script again, disobeying orders again, making independent decisions that could end careers or save lives depending on how things played out. Ghost 1, you are exposed on that rooftop. Pakistani security sweeps the commercial district every morning at 0630 hours precisely. That's 23 minutes from now. You need to pack your gear and move to extract point Bravo immediately. I said negative, Overwatch. Another pause. Longer this time. When Brennan spoke again, his voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that meant the conversation was over and orders were about to be issued with the full weight of Joint Special Operations Command Authority behind them. That's not a request, Ghost 1. That's a direct order from JSOC Command Authority. Pack your gear and move to extract point Bravo. Acknowledge. Riley thought about the last time she'd followed an order exactly as given, without question or deviation. Team 5 walking into that ambush in Kunar province. 8 operators moving through a dried riverbed because the mission plan said that was the route and the timeline said that was the moment. 8 men who would have died if she'd stayed in her lane and observed only and let the mathematics of tactics override the reality of men bleeding out in Afghan dirt. Her father's voice in her memory, clear as the mountain air that morning in Montana when she was 14 and learning what it meant to carry a rifle and make choices that mattered. The mission isn't the order, Riley. The order is what they tell you to do. The mission is what actually needs to happen. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they're not. You have to know the difference, or you're just following commands without thinking, and that makes you a robot with a gun instead of a soldier with judgment. But whose mission, and at what cost? Understood, Overwatch. Ghost 1 acknowledges order. She clicked off the radio before Brennan could respond with additional commands. Didn't move, didn't pack her gear. Just kept watching the airport through her scope, waiting for the pattern to break, for the universe to reveal what Hale had actually planned beyond the obvious trap she was already sitting in, because he'd planned something. Men like Marcus Hale didn't feed intelligence to JSOC by accident or coincidence. Didn't leave trails for snipers to follow without knowing exactly where those trails would lead and what would happen when they arrived. He was teaching her something with all of this. Another lesson in his twisted curriculum. And she was going to learn it whether she wanted to or not. 0630. Pakistani security began their scheduled sweep right on time. Riley watched through her scope as 3 trucks rolled through the commercial district 2 blocks south of her position. Soldiers in the back wearing the digital camouflage pattern of Pakistani army. Weapons ready, eyes scanning rooftops and windows, and anywhere a sniper might hide in this city where violence was common as sunrise. Looking for exactly what she was. An American operator hiding in plain sight with a rifle and orders she wasn't following. They passed her position without stopping, without even looking up at the burned warehouse where she lay invisible against scorched concrete and shadow. Sometimes the best hiding place was the one nobody thought to check because it seemed too obvious to be real. The building too damaged. The position too exposed. Nobody would be stupid enough to use it, which made it perfect. 700. Still no Hale appearing anywhere in her field of view. The sun climbed higher in cloudless sky. Temperature rose from 45 degrees to 60 in 20 minutes. Then 70. Then 80 as the day heated up. Riley's ghillie suit trapped heat against her skin like a greenhouse in summer. Sweat ran down her spine in rivulets, pooled at the small of her back, soaked into her clothes until she could feel the weight of it. Her water supply was getting dangerously low. 2 liters gone in the night and morning, 1 liter remaining. Basic math said she had maybe 4 more hours before dehydration became a serious tactical problem. Before her hands started shaking and her vision started to blur and the shot she needed to make became impossible. But she didn't move, didn't adjust position to seek shade or relief, didn't even shift her weight to relieve the pressure on her hips and shoulders. Just watched the airport through the scope, waiting for something to happen that would justify the voice in her head telling her to stay when every tactical consideration said run while you still can. 0830. A fuel truck arrived at the civilian terminal. Commercial vehicle. Nothing unusual about it in a city where fuel trucks came and went constantly. Local company markings, driver in stained coveralls and a packhole hat. It parked near the private aircraft section where jets and small planes sat waiting for wealthy passengers who could afford to avoid commercial flights. The driver got out, moved slowly in the heat, lit a cigarette with hands cupped against wind that wasn't blowing, smoked it slowly while staring at nothing in particular, got back in the truck cab, drove away without fueling any aircraft. Routine, normal, boring enough to ignore, except the driver had looked directly at Riley's position before leaving. Just a glance. 1 second of eye contact, but his gaze had locked onto the exact spot where she lay hidden 940 meters away, behind concrete and netting and shadow. No hesitation, no searching for movement or shapes that didn't belong. Just direct eye contact across an impossible distance that should have been invisible. Hale's man, confirming she was still in place, still waiting, still playing her assigned part in whatever script he'd written for this performance. 0900. A small Cessna Citation landed on the civilian runway with the kind of precision that spoke of experienced pilots. Single engine, white fuselage with blue stripes running along the sides like racing stripes on a car. Corporate registration visible on the tail in black letters and numbers. It taxied to the far end of the tarmac, away from the commercial terminals and their security checkpoints and cameras that recorded everything. Away from witnesses who might remember faces or ask questions. A ground crew appeared from nowhere, like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. 3 men in orange vests that marked them as airport workers. They rolled a fueling truck into position with practiced efficiency, connected the hose to the aircraft, started pumping fuel into tanks. Standard procedure for any aircraft preparing for flight, except they were taking too long about it. Fuel flow for a Citation should take 12 minutes maximum, according to Riley's training on aircraft capabilities and limitations. These men had been standing there for 18 minutes, and the hose was still connected. The pump still running. They were stalling, waiting for something else to happen. Then the passenger door opened, and Riley's blood froze in her veins. A man stepped out onto the folding stairs, not Hale. Pakistani military uniform that looked freshly pressed, despite the heat. Crisp creases. Polished insignia, 2 stars on his shoulder boards denoting rank of Major General. He was flanked by security detail of 6 men in civilian clothes, but moving like special forces who'd trained together for years. Tight formation, overlapping fields of fire, eyes constantly scanning for threats. They escorted him toward a waiting Mercedes parked near the terminal building. Black, armored, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside, even with magnified optics. Riley tracked the general through her scope with growing unease. Something felt fundamentally wrong about this entire sequence. The timing too precise, the isolation too deliberate, the security posture that screamed VIP movement in hostile territory but without the usual Pakistani military convoy that would accompany a 2-star general traveling in a region where Taliban and insurgents controlled half the countryside. He was important, but he was vulnerable, which meant he was bait for something. Then she saw it, and everything clicked into focus with terrible clarity. A glint of light from a rooftop 600 meters south of her position. Sunlight reflecting off glass, off a lens, off a scope like hers, but pointed in a different direction. She shifted her aim carefully, zoomed in to maximum magnification. There, another sniper, position carefully chosen on top of a 3-story building. Good cover behind an air conditioning unit. Good concealment with local materials scattered around to break up his outline against the sky. Professional setup that had taken hours to prepare. The rifle was an SVD Dragunov, Russian-made, common in this part of the world where Soviet weapons still flooded the black market. The shooter wore local clothes, shalwar kameez, pakol hat, could have been Pakistani ISI conducting overwatch on their own general. Could have been Taliban looking for a high-value target. Could have been one of Hale's contractors earning their substantial pay. But the angle of his rifle was wrong for protective overwatch. He wasn't covering the general's movement with security scans. Wasn't providing backup for the security team. The barrel was pointed directly at the general's projected path, at the kill zone between the aircraft and the Mercedes, at the 30 meters of open tarmac where a man in a crisp uniform would be completely exposed to fire. He was aiming to shoot, to kill. Riley's breath caught in her chest. The mathematics assembled themselves in her mind faster than conscious thought could process all the implications. Hale hadn't come to the airport. He'd sent Riley here instead. Positioned another shooter to assassinate a Pakistani general while an American sniper watched from 940 meters away. And when the general died from a bullet, Pakistani intelligence would lock down the entire district, search every building, every rooftop, every rat hole and hiding place within a kilometer radius. They'd find Riley, an American sniper with a rifle and a clear sightline to the exact spot where a Pakistani general had just been murdered in broad daylight on Pakistani soil. They'd find her equipment, her encrypted radio, her JSOC credentials, her DNA and fingerprints, and everything they'd need to prove an American operator had been present at the assassination. They'd assume she was the killer. This wasn't a trap to kill her. Killing her would be easy and direct, and Hale could have done that a dozen times already if that's what he wanted. This was something worse, something more sophisticated and devastating. This was a trap to frame her, to turn her into an international incident that would destroy US operations across the region. American sniper murders Pakistani general on Pakistani soil. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. Close the supply lines through Pakistan. End cooperation on intelligence sharing. Destroy relationships that had taken decades to build. And Hale would watch it all unfold from somewhere safe and distant, laughing at how perfectly his student had walked into his lesson about consequences and unintended outcomes and the price of trying to be a hero. The other sniper's finger moved toward his trigger. Riley could see it through her scope even at 600 meters. The subtle shift of weight, the final breath held in the lungs, the moment of absolute stillness before the storm of violence. She had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Let the general die and escape in the chaos that would follow, or stop the assassination and reveal her position to everyone. Both options were bad. One resulted in an innocent man's death and a geopolitical disaster that would echo for years. The other risked her own life and the mission and everything she'd worked toward. Her father had taught her the math on this one a long time ago, in the Montana snow, when she was 14 and thought shooting was about accuracy instead of judgment, about hitting targets instead of saving lives that mattered. The mission is bringing everyone home, not just our people, everyone who deserves to go home to families that love them. You make that choice every time you put your finger on a trigger. Choose right or choose wrong, but never choose nothing. Never let good people die because you were too afraid to act. Even the people who didn't know they needed saving. Riley shifted aim in one smooth motion that came from muscle memory and 10,000 hours of practice. Calculated wind speed from the dust devils swirling across the tarmac in the heat. 7 knots from the west. Direction and force accounted for in the equations that governed physics. The distance to the other sniper's position, 610 meters, longer than most of her kills but well within her capability and training. The Dragunov's scope was larger than American optics. Bigger target, easier to hit if you knew where to aim and trusted the math. She exhaled half her breath, found the still point between heartbeats where time stopped. The moment where mathematics became action and thought became bullet traveling through space. Fired. The SR-25 kicked against her shoulder with familiar violence. The suppressor reduced the report to a sharp crack instead of the full thunder of unsuppressed fire. But 610 meters away, across rooftops and air, the effect was devastating and final. The bullet crossed the distance in less than a second, struck the other sniper's scope dead center where the front lens met the metal housing. The glass shattered into fragments. The impact drove the metal backward into his face with enough force to shatter bone and destroy everything behind his eyes. He fell backward off the roof, dead before he understood what had happened. His rifle clattered on the concrete beside him, unfired and useless. The general's security team reacted like they'd trained for exactly this scenario their entire careers. Weapons up in every direction, voices shouting in Urdu with controlled panic. Commands and questions, and the kind of organized chaos that came from professionals who knew they'd just survived an assassination attempt. The Mercedes accelerated away from the terminal in a spray of gravel and burned rubber. Within 15 seconds, the general was gone. Safe. Alive, because Riley had made a choice that might cost her everything she had. The airport erupted into chaos like a kicked anthill, sirens wailing from every direction at once, shouting in multiple languages. Armed security pouring out of buildings like ants responding to a threat. Riley was already moving before conscious thought caught up with tactical necessity. No time for the careful breakdown and methodical packing that left no trace behind. No time for the professional discipline that separated operators from amateurs. She shoved the rifle into her pack without breaking it down, grabbed the ghillie netting and stuffed it in after, ran for the roof access door at full speed. It was locked. Of course it was locked. This building had been abandoned for years in fighting. Nobody remembered. Why would the door be open? She kicked it with her boot. The old wood splintered around the lock but held. Kicked again with everything she had. The frame cracked. Third kick and she was through, stumbling into darkness. The stairwell was pitch black after the brightness outside. She took the stairs 3 at a time, down 4 flights, one hand on the rail to keep from falling, the other on her rifle. Her boots echoing in the enclosed space like drumbeats counting down to capture or escape. Each footfall marking time in a race she might already be losing. Ground floor. She hit the exit door at full speed with her shoulder, burst into an alley behind the terminal building. Voices everywhere, close. Security teams spreading out in search patterns to find the shooter who'd killed their assassin. Riley pulled off the ghillie suit top and stuffed it into a dumpster, blended into the crowd of workers and travelers scattering from the lockdown with fear in their eyes. Walked fast, but not too fast. Just another local scared by the gunfire and running from violence like everyone else. Just another face in a city full of frightened people who'd learned to run first and ask questions later. She made it 3 blocks before the satellite phone in her pack started vibrating. She found cover in an abandoned shop with windows broken out and inventory long since looted. Pulled out the phone with fingers that left blood smears on the screen from cuts she didn't remember getting. It wasn't the encrypted radio she'd been issued by JSOC. This was different, civilian model satellite phone. She hadn't packed it in her gear back at Bagram, which meant someone had planted it while she was moving or sleeping or during one of the 100 moments when her attention was divided. She answered without speaking, just listened. Good shot. Hale's voice came through crystal clear, like he was standing beside her instead of hidden somewhere in Afghanistan's endless mountains. Warm, almost proud, like a teacher congratulating a student who'd finally solved a difficult problem. Your father would have let the general die, taken the smart tactical play, escaped clean without revealing his position. But you couldn't help yourself, had to save him. That's why you'll never be what he was. Riley's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. Where's the nuke? Wrong question, Riley. You're still thinking tactically. Small picture, 1 shot, 1 target, 1 mission. Ask yourself the important question. Why did Jacob die? You killed him, that's why. Did I? A pause. She could hear him breathing, calm, relaxed. Let me tell you what really happened. March 15th, 2003. Fort Bragg, Range 7. Your father and I were running a live fire exercise, extended range marksmanship evaluation. He was testing my skills at 1,200 meters. Standard procedure for advanced training. I took the shot, perfect execution. Everything he'd taught me applied perfectly. But when I looked up from my scope, Jacob had his own rifle aimed at his head. And he said something I'll never forget. You want a lesson, Marcus? Here's one. Some men choose when to die. And he pulled the trigger before I could stop him. Riley felt the ground shift under her feet like earthquake. You're lying. The bullet they pulled from his skull was a 7.62 match grade. Same ammunition I use. Same ammunition he used. But the angle was wrong for me to have fired it from 400 meters away. The medical examiner knew something didn't add up. That's why he made those notes in the margin. But the investigation got buried because suicide looks bad on a decorated soldier's record. Easier to call it an accident and give his widow a pension. Why would he kill himself? Because he discovered what I really was, what I'd been doing for the past 5 years with everything he taught me. And he couldn't live with the fact that he'd created me, that he'd turned me into what I became. So he took what he thought was the honorable way out. Riley's hands were shaking now, not from fear, from rage mixed with growing doubt. What did he discover? Ask the right question and I'll tell you everything. There's a warehouse in Jalalabad, District 7. Look for the building marked with a red crescent on the south wall. Go there. You'll find answers, or you'll find another lesson, your choice. The line went dead with a click. Riley stared at the phone in her hand. Every instinct screamed it was another trap, another manipulation. But Hale had been right about one thing she couldn't deny. She couldn't help herself. She had to know the truth about her father, even if the truth destroyed her. She found the warehouse 2 hours later after navigating through Jalalabad's maze of streets. While Pakistani police searched for the American sniper nobody had actually seen. District 7 was industrial wasteland, concrete buildings and shipping containers and the smell of diesel fuel and unwashed humanity and garbage rotting in heat that made everything worse. The warehouse with the red crescent sat at the end of a dirt road, isolated from other structures. Alone, waiting. No guards visible anywhere, no vehicles parked nearby, no signs of human presence or activity. Just another empty building in a city full of abandoned spaces and forgotten places. Riley approached from the north after climbing to a rooftop across the street. Scanned the warehouse through binoculars for 20 minutes straight. Watched for movement, for patterns, for anything that suggested this was occupied or defended or anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. The front entrance was chained shut with padlock thick enough to stop a truck. But there was a loading dock in the back with the door rolled up about 2 feet. Metal door, gap just wide enough for a person. Too convenient, too easy, too obviously the way inside that Hale wanted her to use. Definitely a trap. She went in anyway because sometimes knowing it's a trap wasn't enough to stop you from walking into it. The interior was dark after the brightness outside. Her eyes adjusted slowly to shadows and dim light filtering through cracks. Rows of empty pallets stacked against one wall. Oil stains on the concrete floor in patterns that suggested vehicles had been parked here recently. The smell of old machinery and rust and something chemical she couldn't quite identify. She moved between the pallets with her rifle up, clearing corners according to training, checking sight lines and angles. Nothing. The warehouse felt empty in the way abandoned places felt empty. No presence, no threat, no Hale. Then she saw the crate. It sat in the center of the floor like an altar or offering. Wood, military-style construction, the kind used to ship sensitive equipment across war zones. Stenciled on the side in English, agricultural supplies. But the dimensions were wrong for farming equipment. Too small, too carefully constructed, the wood too new and fresh-smelling. Riley approached with every sense screaming danger. Set down her rifle carefully, pulled out her knife with hands that knew this was stupid but couldn't stop, pried at the lid with the blade until the nails gave way. The wood creaked as she lifted it. Inside was a mannequin dressed in her father's uniform, Marine Corps dress blues that she recognized from the funeral 15 years ago. The uniform he'd been buried in. The name tape read Cassidy in black letters that hadn't faded. There was a bullet hole through the forehead, precise, deliberate, and pinned to the chest was a note written in careful handwriting. He hesitated when he should have acted. You won't make that mistake. Riley's vision tunneled. The warehouse disappeared. All she could see was the uniform, the bullet hole. The evidence that Hale had somehow dug up her father's grave and stolen his burial clothes and turned his memory into a prop for this sick game of psychological warfare. Then she heard it. A soft electronic beep. Coming from inside the crate, from underneath the mannequin's base. She looked down with dread pooling in her stomach. Wired to the bottom was a timer, digital display, red LED numbers counting down with mechanical precision. 058, 057, 056. Riley ran. She made it maybe 15 meters before the explosion lifted her off her feet and threw her through the warehouse wall, but not directly through. The blast wave caught her at an angle, spinning her sideways into a stack of wooden pallets that collapsed under the impact and actually cushioned her fall by spreading the force across a wider surface area. She hit the ground in the alley outside, rolling through debris, the pallets having absorbed just enough energy to keep her ribs from shattering completely. The world became noise and fire and pain. She tried to stand, her legs didn't work right. Vision doubled, then tripled. Blood ran down the side of her face from somewhere she couldn't identify. She touched her ribs experimentally. White-hot agony exploded through her chest. Broken. At least 2. Maybe 3, maybe more. She coughed and tasted copper. Her radio crackled with Brennan's voice, sounding distant and distorted through the ringing in her ears. Ghost 1, we have explosion reported at your last known position. Multiple casualties being reported. Pakistani security responding in force. ECC rep. Ghost 1, respond immediately. Riley coughed again. More blood. She keyed the mic with shaking hands that didn't want to obey commands from her brain. Overwatch, this is Ghost 1. I'm hit. Building rigged. Nuke intel was false. Hale's playing us with misinformation. Everything is misdirection. Negative Ghost 1. We just received new intelligence from ISI sources inside Pakistan. Suitcase nuke confirmed moving through Khyber Pass in armed convoy. 4 vehicles. Estimated time to Kabul 8 hours. This is real. This is happening. You are closest asset in theater. You have a 2-hour intercept window. Riley tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough that sprayed blood on her hand. Her vision was fading to grey at the edges. It's another trap, Overwatch. Everything he feeds us is poison designed to move us where he wants. Then spring the trap and kill him anyway. That's an order, Ghost 1. This is your mission. Your father's killer is in that convoy. Take the shot or thousands of people die in Kabul. Do you copy? She wanted to argue, wanted to tell Brennan that Hale was always 3 moves ahead, that walking into his traps was exactly what he wanted, that she was injured and bleeding and concussed and in no condition to take a 1,000-meter shot at a moving target through mountain winds. But her vision kept graying out, shock setting in despite her attempts to fight it, cold spreading through her limbs despite the heat. She needed to move, or she'd die in this alley and Hale would win. Ghost 1, do you copy the order? Copy, Overwatch. Moving to intercept target, Ghost 1 out. She found a Pakistani civilian truck parked 2 blocks away. The driver had fled during the explosion like everyone else in this city who'd learned to run from violence. Keys still in the ignition. She climbed into the cab with movements that sent white-hot agony through her broken ribs with every shift of weight. Checked herself in the mirror. Blood matted her hair on the left side, left eye swollen almost shut and turning purple. Cuts across her face from flying debris. She looked like hell, which meant she fit right in with the mission. The drive to Khyber Pass took 90 minutes through mountain roads that twisted like intestines through rock. Riley pushed the truck as hard as the engine would allow, weaving through traffic when there was traffic, ignoring the pain screaming from her ribs with every bump and pothole. The world kept trying to fade to grey at the edges. She kept forcing it back to colour through sheer will that had nothing to do with physical capability. At some point she realised she was talking to herself, or to her father's ghost, or to the memory of the man who'd taught her everything she knew about being a sniper and making impossible choices. One shot ends it. That's what you said. But you never told me which shot, which target, which choice makes me a soldier and which one makes me a murderer. The mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral built by geology instead of faith. Ancient, indifferent. They'd seen armies come and go for thousands of years. Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan and the British Empire and the Soviets and now Americans. Just the latest foreigners to bleed in these rocks and learn that some places couldn't be conquered. She found her position on the cliffs overlooking the road where intelligence said the convoy would pass. A ledge of rock jutting out 1,100 meters from the asphalt below. Perfect sightline down the length of the pass. Perfect elevation for a long-range shot. She set up the rifle with hands that shook from blood loss and trauma and concussion. The bipod legs wouldn't lock right. She had to wedge them with stones to keep them stable. The scope's crack from earlier made the image distorted on the left side. But it was enough. It would have to be enough. The convoy appeared at 1400 hours exactly as intelligence had predicted. 4 SUVs black. Moving fast but maintaining tight formation. Professional drivers who knew how to handle vehicles in hostile territory. Riley tracked them through her damaged scope. The center vehicle had reinforced panels visible even at this distance. Armored. That would be Hale's ride. That would be her target. She calculated the shot through a haze of pain and concussion that made thinking feel like moving through mud. Wind at 6 knots from the west. She could see it in the dust devils swirling across the valley floor below. Temperature 82 degrees and falling as the sun moved toward evening. Elevation angle 17 degrees downward. The bullet would need to drop 42 inches over 1,100 meters of mountain air. She'd need to lead this vehicle by 3 car lengths to account for its speed and her reaction time. Her vision blurred badly. She blinked hard, focused, found the sweet spot between heartbeats that were coming too fast now, too irregular. Her body was failing systemically. She had maybe 1 shot before she passed out from blood loss and shock. Make it count. She exhaled what breath she had, fired. The bullet struck the windshield of the armored SUV dead center, where she'd aimed with everything she had left. The glass spider webbed in a perfect circle of cracks, but didn't shatter, didn't penetrate. Bulletproof glass rated for .50 caliber, probably. Her 7.62 NATO round might as well have been thrown by hand for all the good it did. The convoy stopped immediately. Doors opened, armed men deployed with military precision. But they didn't take cover, didn't return fire toward her position, didn't do any of the things that trained security personnel would do under sniper attack from an elevated position. They just stood there in the open, waiting, like actors who'd rehearsed this scene and knew their blocking. Then Hale stepped out of the center vehicle. He was wearing body armor, full tactical vest with plate carrier and magazine pouches loaded with ammunition. But he took it off with deliberate slowness, like undressing for an audience. Set it on the hood of the SUV, like setting down groceries after shopping, stood in the open with his arms spread wide in a gesture that invited fire. Completely exposed, yelling something Riley couldn't hear from this distance. The satellite phone vibrated in her pack, with timing too perfect to be coincidence. She picked it up with fingers that barely worked anymore. "I knew you'd aim center mass," Hale's voice. Calm, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of attempted murder across a kilometer of mountain air. Predictable. Just like Jacob, he aimed for my chest too that day at Fort Bragg. I wore armor then, just like now. You want to know what happened next? Riley said nothing, just listened while her world narrowed to his voice and the pain and the fading light. He realized I'd planned everything from the beginning. Training under him wasn't about learning his techniques. It was about studying him, documenting everything he taught, every principle of marksmanship and tactics and fieldcraft. Your father wasn't just a teacher, Riley. He was a case study, the best tactical mind in special operations history, and I made all his knowledge mine. What did you do with it? I sold it to the highest bidder. Started in Iraq with private security contracts. Good money for good work, but the real profit was in training insurgent groups. Taliban, Haqqani network, Al-Qaeda affiliates. Anyone who could pay my rates. Your father found out when a raid in 2002 captured one of my students, Taliban commander. Under interrogation, he described tactics that only elite special forces instructors knew. Specific techniques Jacob had developed and refined over decades. Your father put it together, realized what I'd been doing with his lessons. Riley's chest tightened, not from broken ribs, from something worse. He confronted you. He gave me a chance to stop, to turn myself in, to face military justice, like there was honor in what we'd done in our wars. Like we weren't all killers with flags and medals justifying murder. I told him the truth, that I'd been selling his techniques since 1995, that half the insurgent tactics in Afghanistan came directly from him through me, that every American soldier killed by an IED or ambush had died because of what Jacob Cassidy taught me and I taught them. So he killed himself because he couldn't live with creating you. He realized he couldn't stop me without destroying his own legacy. Couldn't admit that his training methods were being used to kill American soldiers. Couldn't face what he'd created, so he did something I hadn't predicted. He aimed at himself, told me, "You want a lesson? Here's one. Some men choose when to die." He pulled the trigger before I could react. Riley's finger tightened on the phone until plastic creaked. "You're a liar. You murdered him." Am I lying? The bullet came from his own rifle, his fingerprints on the trigger, the angle consistent with self-infliction based on ballistics. The medical examiner had questions, but the evidence was clear enough. And I've spent 15 years wondering if he was right. If choosing your own death is the ultimate act of control, or the ultimate act of cowardice when you can't face consequences. Where's the nuke? There is no nuke, Riley. There never was. No suitcase device, no enriched uranium, no threat to Kabul, just a story I told to get you into the field. Alone, broken, desperate. Just like Jacob was in those final moments, because I'm not done teaching. And you're not done learning. The convoy vehicles were pulling away now, leaving Hale standing alone on the road. But he left something behind on the hood of the SUV where his body armor had been. An object small enough that Riley almost missed it through her damaged scope. A bullet, standing upright like a monument. I pulled that from your father's skull, Hale continued through the phone. Had it engraved. JC, the choice was always yours. I've been carrying it for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to return it to his daughter. Come get it if you want it, if you can. What do you want from me? I want you to understand the final lesson Jacob never learned. There's a village 3 kilometers east of your position. 47 civilians, Pakistani informants who sold details about my operation to the CIA. They're the reason you found me at that compound, the reason you're here now. Kill them all. Prove you're not your father. Prove you can make the hard choice when it matters. Riley's blood ran cold. I won't murder civilians. They're not civilians, they're intelligence assets. They chose a side in this war. They just chose wrong. You kill them, I'll give you everything. The bullet with answers engraved, the full story about what really happened, and the real target I've been planning for the past 5 years. Something that will make a suitcase nuke look like a firecracker by comparison. Never. Then Kabul dies at dawn tomorrow. I do have a weapon, Riley, just not the one you thought. It's already in place, already armed, already counting down. Kill those 47 guilty people who sold secrets or watched 2 million innocent people burn. Your choice, your mission, your father's legacy. You're bluffing. Am I? Your father thought I was bluffing too, right up until he realized I wasn't and put that gun to his own head. He made his choice. Time for you to make yours. The line went dead. Riley lowered the phone, stared at the convoy disappearing into the mountain pass like smoke. Her body was failing across multiple systems, ribs grinding with every breath, vision swimming in and out of focus. Blood loss making her hands shake so badly she could barely hold anything. She needed medical evacuation, needed surgery, needed about 6 weeks of recovery in a hospital with competent doctors. But she had 47 people to save or kill in the next 3 hours. She packed the rifle with movements that felt like moving through concrete, climbed down from the ledge with every step pure agony, got back in the truck, drove east on roads that seemed to tilt and spin, found the village exactly where Hale said it would be, a cluster of mud brick houses around a central square, goats in wooden pens, children playing some kind of game with rocks, smoke rising from cooking fires, women carrying water in plastic jugs, old men sitting in shade talking about whatever old men talked about in villages where life moved slowly. It looked like every other village in Afghanistan. Peaceful, innocent, normal. The kind of place where people lived and died without ever knowing or caring about American wars or global politics. Riley set up an observation position 400 meters out behind a low ridge. Scanned the village through binoculars for an hour straight. Counted 43 people visible. Women, old men, kids who couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. If there were Pakistani intelligence assets here, they weren't advertising it with uniforms or weapons or anything that would justify what Hale was asking her to do. Nothing. Just farmers and families living their lives in a war zone. Her radio crackled, Brennan's voice cutting through the static. Ghost 1, new orders from JSOC Command. Stand down on all offensive operations. We're attempting diplomatic contact with Hale through back channels, negotiating a resolution to prevent casualties. Return to Extract Point Alpha for immediate medical evaluation. Riley keyed her mic. Her voice came out rough and damaged. He won't negotiate. This is a test designed to see what I'll do. What kind of test? He wants me to kill civilians. 47 people in a village 3 clicks from my position. Says they're Pakistani intelligence assets. Says if I don't eliminate them, Kabul burns tomorrow. Says he has a weapon in place. Silence on the radio. Long enough that Riley thought the connection had dropped. Then Brennan's voice, tight with barely controlled anger and something that might have been fear. Ghost 1, you are not authorized to engage civilians under any circumstances. That is a direct order from JSOC Command Authority and the Geneva Conventions and basic human decency. Do you understand? I understand, sir. Then get clear of that village immediately and wait for extraction. That's final. Riley clicked off the radio, but she didn't move, didn't start the truck. Just sat there watching the village through binoculars while something Hale had said kept circling in her mind like a vulture. They're the reason you found me at that compound. But she hadn't found Hale at the compound. She'd found an empty building and a photograph and instructions. No weapons cache, no insurgent meeting, no actual target, just a message and a picture of her father. Unless the message itself was the trap and she was still missing something. Riley moved closer to the village, entered on foot with her rifle slung across her back. People stared but didn't run. She was covered in blood and dirt, but they'd seen worse in these mountains. War had made them immune to fear in some fundamental way. She found what she was looking for in the mosque basement. The room had been converted into something else. Storage area that smelled of gun oil and fear. The walls were lined with weapons. AK rifles with fresh cosmoline coating. RPGs in wooden crates with Cyrillic markings. Ammunition in quantities that no civilian village would need for hunting or defense. And in the corner, bound with zip ties and gagged with cloth, 12 men in Pakistani military uniforms. Intelligence service patches visible on their shoulders. Not civilians. ISI agents, captured, held prisoner by someone. Riley pulled the gag from the nearest one. He stared at her with eyes that showed too much white, terrified. "English?" she asked. He nodded frantically. "Who captured you?" "Contractors, Americans. 3 days ago in Peshawar. They said someone important was coming. Said we had to wait here." The satellite phone vibrated with perfect timing. Riley answered. "You checked." Hale's voice, satisfied, almost proud. "Jacob would have believed me, would have walked away or committed to the massacre without verification. But you had to see for yourself, had to confirm before making a choice. You're learning, Riley, not fast enough to save yourself, but learning. What's the real target? You'll find out soon enough if you survive, but first, one more choice for you to make. Those 12 ISI agents in the basement know where my real operation is based. They have the intelligence that could end everything I've built over 15 years. You could extract them, hand them over to your people, let them brief JSOC on my plans and locations and networks. What's the catch? One of them isn't ISI. One of them is Master Chief Owen Reeves, your mentor, your father figure after Jacob died, the man who trained you and believed in you. I grabbed him 3 hours ago in Peshawar during a meeting with liaison officers. Dressed him in a uniform just like the others. Beat him until his own mother wouldn't recognize his face. Threw him in with the rest." Riley's stomach dropped. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Check their faces carefully. See if you can recognize him under all that blood and swelling and fear. You've got about 60 seconds before this becomes academic." She went back to the basement, looked at each prisoner with new eyes and growing dread. They'd all been beaten severely. Faces swollen beyond easy recognition, some missing teeth, hard to identify anyone with certainty under the damage. But the third one from the left. Something about the way he held himself despite the pain. The shape of his shoulders, the look in his eyes. Reeves, she was 90% sure, not certain enough to bet everything on it. Her radio crackled, Brennan's voice urgent now. "Ghost One, we just lost contact with Master Chief Reeves in Peshawar. His last transmission indicated hostile contact with unknown forces. We're launching a rescue operation, but we need you to hold position and provide any intel you have on Hale's operations in that region immediately." Riley looked at the 12 prisoners, looked at the one she thought was Reeves, but couldn't be absolutely certain. The phone rang again. "Time to choose, Riley. Save your mentor and risk letting my intelligence leak to JSOC through the others. Or eliminate the leak permanently by killing all 12 before they can talk. Your father faced this choice once, between stopping me and protecting himself. He chose himself, put a bullet in his own head rather than do what needed to be done. What will you choose?" Riley's hand went to her sidearm. She could shoot the lock, free all 12, sort it out later with DNA and fingerprints. But Hale's voice stopped her with words that made her blood freeze. "Oh, and Riley? The basement is rigged with motion sensors on the door. It opens, the charges blow. Everyone dies. The only way to save Reeves is to shoot him yourself. Mercy kill before the explosion. You've got 60 seconds starting now." The phone went dead. Riley stared at the 12 men. At the one she thought was Reeves. At the timer she could now see wired to the doorframe with red LED numbers, counting down with mechanical precision. 047, 046, 045. Her father's voice in her memory, clear as the day he'd spoken it. "The mission isn't the order, Riley. The mission is bringing everyone home. But what if bringing everyone home meant killing the one person who mattered most? What if the only way to win was to become exactly what Hale wanted her to be? Riley raised her weapon, aimed at the prisoner she thought was Reeves. Her finger found the trigger, the mathematics of mercy, the calculation of survival balanced against loyalty and love. One shot ends it. But which shot? Which choice? Which lesson would define who she became? The timer hit 30 seconds and Riley made her decision. The timer hit 30 seconds and Riley Cassidy made her decision. She shot the lock. Not the prisoner she thought was Reeves. Not the mercy kill that Hale wanted. Not the impossible choice between one man's life and 12. She aimed her sidearm at the padlock securing the basement door and squeezed the trigger with a hand that barely stopped shaking. The 9mm round struck dead center where the hardened steel shackle met the brass body. Metal exploded outward in jagged fragments. The lock shattered into pieces that clattered on the concrete floor like brass rain. The door swung open 6 inches under its own weight, hinges creaking, and nothing happened. No explosion tearing through the confined space. No fire consuming flesh. No detonation that would have turned 12 prisoners and 1 American sniper into scattered pieces too small to identify. The timer kept counting down on its LED display, red numbers blinking with mechanical precision, but no charges blew because there were no charges wired to the door mechanism or the frame or anywhere in the basement. Just a timer connected to nothing but air and Hale's sixth sense of theater. Just another test to see if Riley would pull the trigger on an innocent man to save him from a threat that existed only in her mind and Hale's words. She'd failed his test, or passed it, depending on whether you believed the point was obedience or independent thought. Depending on whether you measured success by following orders or by bringing everyone home alive. 20 seconds remaining, 15, 10. Riley kicked the door fully open with her boot. The 12 prisoners stared at her with eyes that showed too much white, pupils dilated with terror. Terrified, confused, not understanding why they were still alive when the American operator with the gun and the blood all over her face had just made a choice that by all rights should have killed every single person in this room. She moved directly to the third man from the left, the one whose shoulders and bearing she recognized even under layers of blood and swelling that made identification nearly impossible. She pulled her knife from the sheath on her belt, cut his plastic zip ties with a single upward stroke. His hands came free slowly, fingers stiff from hours of restricted blood flow. He pulled the gag from his mouth, coughed violently, spat blood, looked at her with eyes she'd known for 10 years of training and operations, and the kind of trust that only came from going into hell together and coming back alive. "Took you long enough, ma'am." Master Chief Owen Reeves, voice rough as gravel, face beaten to the point where his own mother might struggle to recognize him under the purple and black swelling, but alive, conscious, already working to free the prisoner beside him with hands that barely functioned but refused to quit. "Can you walk?" Riley asked, already moving to help free the others. "Can you?" He looked at her face properly for the first time. Really looked. The blood matted in her hair from the warehouse explosion, the swelling that had closed her left eye to a purple slit, the cuts across her cheeks and forehead where flying debris had scored her skin, the way she was holding her ribs like they might fall out if she breathed too hard. "Jesus Christ, Mom, you look like you went 10 rounds with a freight train and the train had friends." The train won, and its friends were waiting. "How long have you been here?" 6 hours, maybe 8, maybe 10. Lost track after they stopped hitting me. He got the next prisoner free, started on the third. His fingers weren't working right, but muscle memory carried him through. "They grabbed me in Peshawar. American contractors, military bearing, said someone important was coming. Told me to sit tight and keep quiet. Didn't mention they were going to beat 7 kinds of hell out of me first, just to make it look good." "Who were they working for?" "Who do you think? Hale, always Hale. Man's got more contractors and assets than the CIA." The last prisoner came free. All 12 ISI agents were standing now, rubbing circulation back into their wrists, looking at Riley like she was either their salvation or just a different flavor of captor. These men have intelligence on Hale's entire operation, real intelligence this time, locations, networks, financial records, shell companies, everything JSOC has been trying to get for 6 months. Riley's satellite phone vibrated in her tactical vest pocket. She pulled it out with fingers that left blood smears on the screen. stared at the incoming call from a number that was nothing but encrypted routing through a dozen countries, almost didn't answer, almost smashed the phone against the concrete wall and walked away from Hale's games and lessons and tests that cost blood and bones and sanity. But she needed to hear what came next, needed to understand what final move he'd planned in this chess match that had already cost her 3 broken ribs, a concussion and more blood than she cared to calculate. She answered without speaking, just listened. Interesting choice. Hale's voice came through crystal clear, like he was standing beside her instead of hidden somewhere in Afghanistan's endless mountains. Less amused than in their previous conversations, more analytical, the tone of a teacher reviewing a student's exam and finding unexpected answers that didn't fit the expected pattern. You chose the lock instead of the man, rejected the binary I offered you, found the third option when I only gave you 2. Your father never learned that particular skill, never developed that flexibility of thought. He saw every problem as either or, black or white, kill me or let me go, stop me or protect his legacy, live with the guilt of what he'd created or die with his honor intact. He never understood there were other choices, other paths through the maze, other ways to solve impossible equations. Riley's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. Where is it? Where's the suitcase nuke you've been threatening? There is no weapon, Riley. There never was. No suitcase nuke sitting in some basement waiting to vaporize Kabul. No chemical attack. No dirty bomb in the embassy parking garage. Just a story I told to get you moving across Afghanistan, to put you in exactly the right positions at exactly the right times, to see if you'd learned anything from watching your father fail at the one test that actually mattered. Riley's vision went red around the edges. Her finger tightened on the phone hard enough that the plastic casing creaked under the pressure. You lying son of a... She couldn't finish. Rage choked the words. I'm not lying now. That's the important distinction. I lied about the weapons, about the immediate threats, about the timelines and targets and all the tactical details that moved you from Kunar province to Jalalabad to Khyber Pass to this basement. But I'm telling you the absolute truth about Jacob Cassidy, about what really happened on March 15th, 2003 on a firing range at Fort Bragg when your father discovered what I'd become, what I'd been doing with everything he taught me. He confronted you, you killed him, end of story. No, he confronted me. And when he realized he couldn't stop me without admitting that everything I'd learned came from him, when he understood that exposing me meant destroying his own legacy and proving that his training methods were being used to kill American soldiers, he made a choice, the only choice he thought he had left. He put his service rifle to his own head, said one sentence, "Some men choose when to die," and he pulled the trigger while I watched through my scope from 400 meters away. Why? Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what he understood in that final moment, that there are no clean choices in war, no good options that don't cost something precious, just bad and worse and catastrophically terrible. He chose the catastrophic option, removed himself from the equation rather than play the game to its brutal conclusion. But you're still playing, still fighting, still trying to bring everyone home, even when home is a lie and the mission is impossible, and the only victory available is just surviving another day. Riley looked across the basement at Reeves, helping the ISY agents gather their scattered equipment and weapons. At the men she'd saved by refusing to accept Hale's binary choice between mercy killing and mass death. What do you want from me now? I want you to make the choice Jacob couldn't make. The hard one. The real one. The choice that actually matters. Hale's voice dropped lower, became almost intimate, like he was sharing a terrible secret. There's a facility in Kabul, US Embassy compound, basement level 3. I've placed something there that will change everything about this war. Not a weapon, something far worse than any bomb could ever be. More lies, more misdirection. No, truth this time. For once, complete truth. He paused for 3 heartbeats. Evidence, documents, digital files containing complete proof of every black operation the United States has conducted in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. Every drone strike that killed civilians and got reported as enemy combatants eliminated. Every torture site run by contractors with Pentagon approval. Every payoff to warlords who turned around and used American money to fund Taliban operations. Every lie the Pentagon told Congress and the American people about progress and victory and light at the end of a tunnel that never existed. Mete. Riley's blood turned to ice water in her veins. You're bluffing. You don't have that kind of access. I've been collecting evidence for 15 years, since before your father died, since I realized what we'd all become in this endless war. Files stolen from classified databases, recordings of meetings that were never supposed to be recorded. Confessions from contractors who wanted to clear their consciences before they drank themselves to death. It's all real. It's all documented. And it's all sitting in that embassy basement waiting to detonate in a different way than any explosive could manage. What's the trigger? Dead man's switch. Remote trigger coded to my heartbeat and a timer. At dawn tomorrow, if I don't input a 16-digit code, those documents upload automatically to every major news organization in the entire world. New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, everyone simultaneously. The war ends within a month, not because we won or lost on any battlefield, but because the American people finally see what their government has been doing in their name with their tax dollars and their children's lives. Riley's mind raced through implications and consequences. What happens then? Public support collapses overnight. Congress cuts all funding for Afghan operations. Soldiers come home by Christmas, bases close, contractors lose their jobs. The whole machinery of war grinds to a halt. Another pause, but the cost is everything, every sacrifice made meaningless. Every death explained as being part of an elaborate lie. Every family told their son or daughter died for absolutely nothing. Every soldier who believed in the mission, realizing they were just pawns in a game played by politicians who never cared. So what's my choice? Stop me, infiltrate the embassy, find the evidence before dawn, destroy it all before it uploads, save the mission, save the war, save the comfortable lie that lets people sleep at night thinking their government tells them the truth. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Or let it upload. Let the complete truth burn everything down to ashes. Let your father's sacrifice finally mean something by exposing the machinery that killed him and 10,000 others. Let the world see what soldiers really do when nobody's watching, and the cameras are turned off. Riley's hands were shaking now, not from blood loss or shock, from the weight of what he was offering. Those aren't the only two options. No? Hale actually sounded curious, genuinely interested. Then find the third choice, the option that saves everyone and costs nothing, the magical solution that makes all the hard decisions disappear. You've got until dawn. That's 11 hours from now. I'll be waiting at the embassy, rooftop level, southeast corner, same place we started this whole dance. Come kill me if you can. Come stop the upload if you dare. Or walk away and let truth destroy what comfortable lies built over 20 years of war. Your choice, Ghost One. Make it count, make it matter. The line went dead with a click that sounded like a door closing. Riley lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Not from fear anymore. From pure rage mixed with exhaustion, mixed with the dawning realization that Hale had been playing an entirely different game than she'd thought. Not trying to kill her, not trying to defeat her, trying to forge her into something new. To teach her lessons her father never learned. To turn her into a weapon that could see past the binary choices and find the third path through impossible terrain. She looked at Reeves, blood dripping from cuts on his face, eyes clear despite the beating. We need to extract from this village, right now. They commandeered a Pakistani military truck the ISI agents had hidden 2 blocks away. Drove through Jalalabad's pre-dawn streets while security forces searched for the American sniper who'd killed their assassin at the airport. Reeves handled the driving because Riley could barely see straight anymore. Her vision kept fading in and out like a light with a loose connection, her ribs grinding against each other with every pothole, blood loss and shock and concussion turning reality into something distant and dreamlike. "You need a hospital, ma'am," Reeves said quietly, not pushing, just stating facts. "I need 12 hours. Then you can bury me with full honors." That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny. Trying to stay conscious. They reached a CIA safe house on the outskirts of the city 2 hours before dawn. One of the ISI agents turned out to be a doctor trained in combat medicine. He examined Riley with practiced hands, pressing gently on ribs that screamed in protest. checking pupils that didn't dilate evenly, taking blood pressure that made him shake his head and mutter in Urdu. "You should be dead," he said in heavily accented English. "Blood pressure barely sustainable. 3 ribs fractured. Severe concussion, internal bleeding possible. You cannot fight in this condition. You can barely stand upright." Riley stood up to prove him wrong. The room tilted 45 degrees. She grabbed the wall to keep from falling, stayed vertical through sheer stubborn will that had nothing to do with physical capability. "I can fight. I can shoot. That's all I need to do." The doctor taped her ribs with enough compression to keep the bones relatively stable, stitched the worst facial cuts with black thread that would leave scars, gave her antibiotics for infection and painkillers she refused because she needed to stay sharp, handed her a blood pressure reading that would have hospitalized anyone with sense. Reeves pulled her aside once the doctor finished, away from the ISI agents, who were cataloging their intelligence and preparing reports. His voice dropped to the quiet tone he'd used at sniper school when students were about to make decisions that would end careers or lives. "Mom, this is completely insane. You're seriously injured. Hale has been playing psychological games with your head for 3 days straight. We have the ISI agents and their intelligence. We can hand this entire operation to JSOC and let them run it properly with planning and support. There's no time for proper planning. Dawn is 9 hours away. JSOC would spend 8 hours arguing about approach vectors and rules of engagement and 1 hour executing. Too slow. Hale would be gone. Then we abort the mission entirely. Let the documents upload if they exist. If Hale's telling the truth about what's in those files, maybe the American people deserve to know. Maybe the truth is worth more than protecting comfortable lies." Riley thought about that while staring at maps of the embassy compound spread across the safe house table. Thought about her father. About the soldiers still fighting who believed the mission mattered. About families back home who needed to believe their children died for something real instead of political calculations and contractor profits. The truth would destroy morale across the entire military, end thousands of careers overnight, get people killed when public support collapses and funding disappears, and we have to abandon everyone who helped us. Sometimes the truth isn't the answer. Sometimes the comfortable lie is what keeps people alive long enough to make it home. And the lies are better? Sometimes the lie is what gives soldiers a reason to keep fighting when everything else says quit. Riley traced the embassy perimeter on the map. Hale said he'd be at the embassy, rooftop, waiting for me. That means he wants this confrontation, wants me there, which means that's exactly where I shouldn't go. Then where? Riley pulled up the ISI intelligence files on a laptop. Maps, surveillance photos, financial records, shipping manifests. The agents had been tracking Hale for months, building a pattern of his movements and operations. And buried in the data was something interesting that didn't fit the pattern. A shipping container. Karachi port to Kabul, container number 4782. Contents officially listed as agricultural equipment for an NGO development project. But the routing was all wrong. The container had been delivered directly to the US Embassy compound 3 days ago, signed for by someone using one of Hale's known aliases. "He didn't plant documents in the embassy and leave," Riley said slowly, seeing it clearly now. "He planted himself. He's been inside the compound for 3 days, living in that container probably, hiding in plain sight, waiting." The whole story about rooftop confrontations and remote triggers was misdirection. "He's there physically, in the basement, which means I can stop him physically instead of chasing ghosts." Reeves studied the manifest data with practiced eyes. "How do you infiltrate the embassy? Security protocols are tighter than Fort Knox, especially in the basement levels where classified operations run. Armed Marines at every checkpoint, biometric scanners. The whole 9 yards. I don't infiltrate. I walk in the front gate." "How?" Riley looked at the ISI doctor. "You still have contacts in Pakistani military bureaucracy. People who can forge documents on short notice." The doctor smiled slightly, first hint of humor since examining Riley's injuries. "Some contacts, depending what you need. I need a US Army uniform, major rank, and orders assigning me to embassy security for a readiness inspection. Can you make that happen in 6 hours? I can make it happen in 2 hours. Less if you pay extra." Money's not an object. Lives are. 5 hours later, Riley Cassidy walked through the US Embassy main gate in Kabul wearing a borrowed army uniform that almost fit her frame. The name tape read, Morrison, major rank insignia on the shoulders. The guards at the gate checked her forged orders with routine efficiency, scanned the fake ID that the ISI doctor's contacts had produced with impressive speed, called someone inside to verify the inspection was scheduled. Everything checked out because Hale had made it check out, had probably inserted the fake authorization into the embassy computer systems days ago, wanted her inside, wanted this confrontation in a place where he controlled every variable. She walked through security with a confidence she didn't feel. Marines nodded as she passed. Diplomats and intelligence officers ignored her completely. Just another army major conducting another inspection in a war zone where officers came and went like the seasons. The basement levels required higher security clearance. She presented the forged credentials at the access point. The system hesitated for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then the light turned green. The reinforced door unlocked with a heavy mechanical click. She descended into the classified sections where the real machinery of war operated away from public oversight and congressional questioning. Hale had said rooftop, southeast corner, a perfect sniper position overlooking the city. But that was theater, misdirection. He wouldn't expose himself on a roof where satellite surveillance and Pakistani intelligence could spot him easily. He'd be down here, in the dark, where he controlled the terrain and the sightlines and every possible avenue of approach or escape. Riley found shipping container 4782 on basement level 3, exactly where the manifest said it would be. The agricultural equipment that wasn't agricultural equipment. The container had been modified internally, cut open on one side, converted into a living space with surprising efficiency. Laptop and communications equipment on a makeshift desk. Camping cot, supplies for extended occupation, and wired throughout the entire container with enough C4 explosive to bring down the entire wing of the embassy and kill everyone working in the classified sections. But no Hale, just an empty container and another handwritten note in that careful script Riley had come to recognize. The same neat handwriting from every message and taunt and lesson. Wrong floor. I'm above you. Always have been. Like Jacob was above me once, until he fell, and I climbed higher. Come to the roof or I detonate this basement and kill 200 Americans working late shifts. You have 5 minutes. Timer started when you opened this note. Riley looked at the C4 wiring, at the digital timer that had indeed started counting down from 5 minutes, at the choice Hale was forcing again, civilians or mission, innocent lives or personal vendetta. The same impossible mathematics her father had faced when Hale backed him into a corner 15 years ago. She keyed her radio to the encrypted channel connecting her to Reeves, positioned outside the embassy perimeter with ISI support. Overwatch, this is Ghost 1. Embassy basement is rigged with enough C4 to level the building. Timer shows 4 minutes 20 seconds. I'm proceeding to the roof as directed. Ghost 1, that's a kill box. Rooftop means exposure with no cover. He'll have perfect position to engage while you're vulnerable. I know. But if I don't go, he kills 200 people who never signed up for this war. What's the actual plan here, Mom? Riley climbed stairs toward the roof access while her mind raced through tactical scenarios. The plan is I stop giving Hale what he wants. I give him what he needs instead. That makes zero tactical sense. It will in about 4 minutes. She emerged onto the embassy roof as dawn painted the eastern sky purple and gold. The last stars fading like dying embers. Kabul spreading out below in a maze of concrete and desperation. Marcus Hale stood at the southeast corner, exactly where he'd promised to be. No body armor now, no visible weapons, just a man in his 50s wearing tactical pants and a black shirt. Grey at the temples, scars visible on his forearms and hands, looking exactly like what he was underneath all the manipulation and psychological warfare. A soldier who'd forgotten why he started fighting and couldn't remember how to stop. You came, not surprised, just satisfied, like a prediction confirmed. I wasn't entirely certain you would. Thought you might evacuate the building instead, let the evidence burn along with everyone inside. There is no evidence, just explosives and manipulation, just another lie to get me here. Smart. Jacob's daughter showing her father's analytical mind. Hale gestured at the city below, but wrong on one count. There is evidence. On that laptop in the container. Everything I promised. I've been collecting proof for 15 years. Every war crime, every covered-up atrocity, every comfortable lie the Pentagon told while soldiers died for political calculations. Riley moved closer, slowly, hands visible and empty. No weapon drawn yet. Why? Why collect evidence if you were just going to sell tactics to insurgents? Because I wanted leverage, insurance, proof that if they ever came after me, I could burn the whole system down with me. He smiled without warmth, and because someone needed to document what we really do when the cameras turn off and the reporters go home. What men like Jacob trained soldiers like me to become. My father didn't train you to betray your country. He trained me to win at any cost, to use every advantage, to see 3 moves ahead and manipulate the board until victory was inevitable. I just applied those lessons to different objectives than he intended. Riley was 15 feet away now, close enough to see Hale's eyes clearly, close enough to recognize something in them she hadn't expected. Not madness, not evil, just exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a man who'd been fighting so long, he'd forgotten what peace felt like. You didn't have to kill him. You could have let him walk away. He would never have walked away. You know that. Men like Jacob don't quit. They just choose different ways to lose. Hale's hand moved toward his belt. He taught me everything about tactics and nothing about mercy. So when he put that rifle to his head, I let him pull the trigger. Watched through my scope, counted it as his final lesson to me. What lesson? That some choices destroy you no matter what you pick. That sometimes there are no good options left, just the one that hurts least. His hand settled on something at his belt. Time to see if you learned better. Riley's hand went to her sidearm, drew it with practiced speed, aimed at Hale's center mass. Don't move. Or what? You'll shoot me. He laughed, sharp bark of sound. That's the binary I gave your father. Kill me or let me go. He chose option 3. Killed himself instead. What's your choice? I'm not choosing. I'm changing the equation. She fired, not at Hale, at the roof access door behind her. The bullet struck the metal frame at a precisely calculated angle, ricocheted at 23 degrees, hit the radio detonator attached to Hale's belt, shattered it into electronic fragments. The basement timer kept counting down, but Hale's remote trigger was destroyed. He couldn't detonate early, couldn't kill everyone in the building if Riley refused to play his game. The binary choice was eliminated. The equation changed by physics and geometry instead of moral philosophy. Hale looked at his destroyed detonator, then back at Riley, and laughed. Different laugh this time. Genuine, almost proud. There it is. There's the shot. The lesson Jacob never learned. He raised his hands slowly. Ricochet, indirect approach, changing the angle of attack to hit what you can't reach directly. I taught you that technique 2 years ago in advanced training, and you just used it to beat me at my own game. Where's the real trigger for the basement charges? There isn't one. The C4 is real. The timer is real, but there's no remote detonator because I never intended to blow the building. Just needed you to think I would. Needed the threat to get you up here. He gestured at the city. The question now is, can you get back downstairs in time to disarm it manually? Riley's mind calculated time and distance. 3 minutes on the timer, 6 flights of stairs to basement level 3. Maybe 90 seconds if she ran. Then however long it took to identify and disable the correct circuit in explosives she'd never seen before. Her father's voice. The mission is bringing everyone home. She ran, took the stairs down at reckless speed, her broken ribs screaming with each jarring step, vision blurring from concussion and pain, radio in her hand calling for EOD support that was 20 minutes away when she had maybe 2. Hit basement level 3 with 90 seconds showing on the timer. The C4 was wired throughout the container in a pattern she'd seen in demolition training. Military standard, professional work, but not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. She found the main charge, traced wires back to the timer, commercial blasting cap. 3 wires, red, blue, green. Her explosive ordnance training said cut the blue wire. Middle circuit, standard protocol. But her instinct screamed this was Hale. Nothing would be standard, nothing would follow the textbook. 60 seconds. She thought about her father, about the gun to his head, about seeing only 2 choices when there might have been 3, about the lesson Hale had been teaching through all of this. There's always another option. 45 seconds. Riley didn't cut a wire. She grabbed the blasting cap with both hands, ripped it physically out of the main charge, tore the connection apart with brute force instead of technical precision. The timer kept counting, but without the cap, the C4 was just inert clay, harmless, useless. 30 seconds, 20, 10, 0. Nothing exploded. No fire, no death, just silence and the sound of Riley's ragged breathing and her heart hammering against her broken ribs. She grabbed the laptop from the desk, ran back upstairs. Marines and security were flooding the basement now. Pakistani bomb squad arriving. Chaos and questions and people demanding to know what happened. Riley pushed through them, out the main entrance, into dawn light that hurt her eyes. Hale was gone from the roof. Of course he was gone. Probably left the moment she'd run for the basement. This whole thing had been about the choice, about the lesson, about proving Riley could see options her father missed. She looked at the laptop in her hands, opened it with shaking fingers. The files were there. Everything Hale had promised. Drone strike reports, interrogation videos, financial records showing payments to warlords who funded insurgents. Every ugly truth about 20 years of war in Afghanistan. Her finger hovered over the delete key. One choice: destroy the evidence, protect the mission, keep the comfortable lies intact so soldiers could keep fighting for something they believed mattered. Another choice: upload the files, burn it all down. Let the truth destroy what lies had built, even if it meant everything her father died for became meaningless. Riley thought about Jacob Cassidy, about the rifle to his head, about being forced to choose between bad and catastrophic, about the third option he never saw because Hale had eliminated every path except the ones that led to destruction. She copied the files to an encrypted drive, deleted them from the laptop, handed the drive to Reeves when he found her sitting on the embassy steps. "What's this?" he asked quietly. "Everything Hale collected, every crime, every cover-up, every truth we've been hiding." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Give it to JSOC. Let them decide what to do with it. Let someone above my pay grade make the call about truth versus mission. I'm just a sniper. I take the shots I'm authorized to take." Is that the third option? Passing the choice up the chain of command? The third option is recognizing that some choices aren't mine to make. My father thought he had to carry the weight of everything himself, had to be judge and jury and executioner. It killed him because no one person can carry that weight forever. She stood up slowly. Everything hurt. I'm choosing to carry my part and let others carry theirs. Reeves took the encrypted drive. What about Hale? He's still out there, still teaching his lessons to whoever will pay. We'll find him, or we won't, but he's not my mission anymore. Not today. What is your mission? Riley looked at the sunrise painting Kabul in gold and red. Another day in an endless war that maybe didn't have any good answers. Bringing everyone home, starting with myself. 3 months later, Riley stood in Arlington National Cemetery at her father's grave. Winter morning, cold enough to see breath. The headstone was simple granite, name and rank and dates. Nothing about how he died, nothing about the choice he'd made or been forced to make. She'd spent 15 years angry at Jacob Cassidy for choosing death over fighting, for being weak when she needed him to be strong, for leaving her alone with questions that had no answers. But she understood now. He hadn't been weak, he'd been cornered, manipulated by Hale into a position where every option led to betrayal. And rather than betray his principles or his country or his legacy, he'd chosen to remove himself from the equation entirely. It wasn't courage, but it wasn't cowardice either. It was just the best answer he could find to an impossible question that had no good solutions. Riley placed a hand on the cold stone. "I found the third option, Dad. Took me 3 broken ribs and almost dying 6 times. But I found it." Her breath misted in the cold air. Hale was right about one thing. You taught him everything he needed to know about tactics. But you didn't teach him everything you knew. There were lessons you kept for yourself, lessons I had to learn the hard way by watching what you did instead of what you said. She stepped back, saluted the headstone with parade ground precision, turned to leave. Master Chief Reeves stood at the cemetery entrance. Waiting. Patient. He'd been waiting 3 months for her to be ready for this conversation. How do you feel, ma'am? Ribs healed, vision's clear. Medical says I'm fit for full duty. That's not what I asked. Riley thought about the real question, about whether she was okay after everything. After learning her father was murdered by his own student. After almost being killed a dozen different ways. After making impossible choices and living with the consequences. I'm good. Better than I've been in 15 years. I know what happened now. I know why he died. And I know it wasn't my fault or his weakness. Just Hale's manipulation and impossible choices. Hale's still out there somewhere. Still recruiting. Still teaching. I know. JSOC is tracking financial movements. Following the money. We'll find him eventually. Reeves pulled an envelope from his coat. No return address. Just Riley's name handwritten in careful script she recognized instantly. This came to JSOC headquarters yesterday, addressed specifically to you. Riley opened it. Inside was another photograph. Not her father this time. This photo showed Master Chief Reeves in his quarters at Fort Bragg, asleep in his bunk, completely vulnerable. The picture had been taken 3 days ago, according to the timestamp, and written on the back in Hale's handwriting, Lesson 7. The hardest targets are the ones you care about. Training resumes when you're ready. Until then, stay sharp. Your father's legacy depends on what you become. M.H. Riley stared at the photo, at proof that Hale could reach Reeves any time he wanted. Could reach anyone she cared about, that the lessons weren't over, that the game was still being played on a board she couldn't see. What are you going to do? Reeves asked quietly. What I should have done from the beginning. Stop reacting to his moves and start making my own. She put the photo back in the envelope. He wants to teach lessons? Fine. Time for the student to teach the teacher a few things. Such as? That some weapons cut both ways, that students eventually surpass their teachers, and that Jacob Cassidy's legacy isn't soldiers who die for impossible choices. She looked at Reeves, at the man who trained her and believed in her and helped her survive. It's soldiers who learn to create new options when the old ones all lead to destruction. Where does that leave us? It leaves me going back to work. JSOC has a new program training the next generation of operators. They asked if I wanted to be part of it. Teaching? Teaching what my father taught me, what Hale taught me, what I learned from making every mistake possible and surviving anyway. Riley started walking toward the cemetery exit, toward whatever came next. One shot, one purpose, one lesson at a time. Behind them, the sun climbed higher over Arlington, over the graves of soldiers who'd made their own impossible choices and lived or died with the consequences. Over the city where politicians debated wars and generals moved pieces on boards and families waited for their children to come home from places they couldn't find on a map. And somewhere 3,000 miles away in an airport lounge, Marcus Hale watched news coverage of Riley Cassidy receiving a commendation for stopping a terrorist attack at the Kabul embassy. Watched her face on the screen, the set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone who'd been broken and rebuilt stronger. He smiled slightly, opened his laptop, began typing a new lesson plan, because the point was never to destroy Riley Cassidy. The point was to forge her into something her father could never be. A weapon without hesitation. A soldier without doubt. An operator who could see 3 moves ahead and make the hard choices without breaking. And somewhere in the process of that forging, to prove that Jacob Cassidy's greatest legacy wasn't the soldiers he trained or the tactics he taught. It was the daughter who learned to transcend his limitations and find options where he saw only endings. Hale sent encrypted messages to contacts in 6 countries. Started moving pieces into position for the next lesson, the next test, the next impossible choice that would either forge Riley harder or break her completely. Because teaching never stopped, learning never ended, and the only question that mattered was whether the student could eventually surpass the teacher. Time would tell, and Marcus Hale had nothing but time.